I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on Spotlight, are you ready for a great adventure? One that begins in the summer of 1971 by hitchhiking across the state of Texas upon graduation from college to a destination that is more or less unknown. That is the story told in Wolf Creek. It's more or less a novelized autobiography of our guest today, William Pardue. William, Bill, thank you so much for joining us here today on Spotlight.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Love your book. I love being transported back into 1971. So 1971, I was about, 10 or 11 years old. And it was a different world. It was a world
Very
where
different.
people did hitchhike. You rarely see people hitchhiking nowadays. Let's start with the beginning. It's 1971. And you're about to graduate from the University of Texas, Austin. Tell me about that chapter in your life.
Well, I was a young man. You know what it's like to be a young man. And back in the day, we didn't have as many obstacles to do what we wanted to do. So I just happened to find this, and it was my destiny, obviously. Advertisement for a job of wilderness counseling. I loved the outdoors. I loved everything outdoors. I said, somebody's going to pay me to go wilderness camping. I'll do that in a heartbeat. And I had a degree in zoology. Mm-hmm. So, and I was ready to take on the world. In fact, I have a picture of me when I was leaving, if you'd like to see that real quick.
Sure.
This is what I looked like when I was leaving.
Wow. Really
this was my vision quest, right? That's what I looked like inside. Nobody saw that, but right. I knew who it was. So this guy was going out into the world to see if he could conquer whatever it was that life threw at him. And I wanted him to throw the hardest and the best and the fastest. And so that's what I got in this job. And the analogy is this. The analogy is this. They pick you up in an airplane, fly you over the ocean. You take all your clothes off. They drop you in the middle of the ocean into a pool of sharks, and they say bye.
Exactly. And in 1971, it was a very different era than now. We're talking roughly 50 years ago, and there was a lot of racial strife. Right. I mean, that's documented right off in your book with the incident with your girlfriend on campus. Tell us a little bit about that. What happened there?
Well, again, this was a lot of racial strife. They're burning the cities. They're assassinating politicians. They're blowing up institutions, taking over colleges. So it was a rough time. So my girlfriend had walked downtown Texas, and they were having a demonstration. And this was a splinter group of the Black Panthers. And they just really gave her a hard time. She came back to me crying. I said, you know what? I'm going to go down there and say something to them because it's just not proper. So when I got down there, I found myself, I approached the table where the leader was obviously there. He got mad, he overturned the table immediately. I was surrounded by, had to be 100 people. And I was the only white guy in that circle. And I didn't say anything mean. I just said, look, you really need to treat people differently than what you're treating them. So they eventually said, they brought their biggest guy out. And they said, why don't we settle this? We'll go behind this building and we'll settle it. And I had just had a motorcycle accident, so both of my arms were, thank God. Well, I had an excuse.
Yeah, you had a gentleman's way out. I can't do it.
Well,
Bandages,
I would, but.
Yeah, exactly.
And like I traditionally do, I talked my way out of that. But that was the scene back then. And that night, we were approached by two Black young men on campus, and they got right in front of us. This is about midnight. And one of them had a butcher knife in his hand, down by his side. And he said to me, are you the guy that was there downtown? I said, yeah, that was me. He says, I'm going to cut your heart out. It just happened to be, and this is, somebody helping me again. A man from across camp, maybe 20 yards away, came up on a bicycle, came between us, and a white guy, started calling me all kinds of names, racist. And so we departed while he was engaging them. And that was divine intervention as far as I'm concerned.
Absolutely, absolutely. You cheated death on that one, it sounds like, for sure. But it also kind of lends itself to your story because that's the backdrop of you hitchhiking across Texas. And you're about to work with a bunch of kids who are from the south side of Chicago, kids that we call basically wayward teens or juvenile delinquents,
Right.
in many cases, criminals. So your journey there is part of your journey, quote unquote, and the anticipation leading up to it. But tell me a little bit about once you arrive and you encounter the group of young men you'll be working with.
Right. So that was really my first interview in this job was with the social worker, right, in his office, all that stuff. My second one was with the boys. And so they arrived. We were out at a campground waiting for them to come. Never met them. We'd heard the stories about them cutting the legs off of animals and burning them, setting them on fire, you know, the whole bit. We'd heard all that. But here they come tumbling off the bus. The first one is thrown off of the bus, and the others just come off in kind of a pack. So I happened to be at one end of the picnic table. My other counselor was on the other end, and he was a retired Marine from Vietnam. Younger guy, but he was there, didn't say a word. He was watching me to see if I was going to pass my second interview. So the leader of the group sits across from me. They get me to the very edge of the table, and he blows smoke in my face, right? And I said, you know what, dude, I'll give you one pass on that, but just don't let it happen again. 5 seconds later, right?
That's like an invitation to a kid who's troubled, right?
Of course.
Yeah.
So what do I do? Just because I'm the wild man that I am, I jump across the table, I grab him, I throw him down on the ground. We roll down the hill until I can at least subdue him, right? Because you don't want to hurt him because you have to work with these guys.
Right.
So you at least subdue them and show them who is the alpha male in this situation.
Right.
So he figured that out, and then he comes up, and the next guy is the enforcer, right? The strong guy of the group who came over and he started picking on one of the younger kids, hitting him in the head right next to me. I said, dude, don't do that. Just don't do it. He did it again. Here we go again, down the hill. You know, second fight within 15 minutes.
Wow.
Did the same thing. You subdued him. And then the first guy says, just make sure you don't close your eyes tonight because I'm going to kill you with this axe. I mean, we had stuff out there to chop trees and all that kind of stuff, but I said, that's fine. I'll be waiting for you. So, you know, nothing happened. And as we went along, they finally allowed me to be their leader. They accepted me, but I had to pass certain tests.
You had basically had to assert your dominance right off the bat in order to be respected.
Right. They forced me to do that.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And like we said, it's a different world. I don't know if you could get into, you know, fisticuffs with these guys like you did back then. Nowadays, you know, in our coddling, you know, era, that you'd be billed as the world's worst, you know, camp counselor, but
I'd be arrested.
Exactly. And you'd be canceled and your life would be ruined.
But yeah.
You know, when I was growing up, there were priests that slapped you across the face if you weren't doing what you were supposed to be doing. Irish Christian brothers who would punch you in the side of the head if you had a smirk on your face. So I'm not advocating violence, but when dealing with young men who are raging with testosterone, who are troubled, and in your case, potentially criminal, you do have to kind of assert your dominance.
Oh yeah, you have to, or you die. I mean, we had counselors out there they set on fire. You couldn't leave them alone with the boys because they were, you know, they were in danger of losing their lives. And we had killers out there. You know, we had psychopaths, we had sociopaths. These were not normal. And what it really was they did not know what to do with these boys. They couldn't deal with them in Chicago. They couldn't deal with them in Texas. They said, look, we're going to buy some land out in the country. We're just going to drop them there. You guys take care of them, make whatever your rules are that you need to make. And you can take your canoe trips and your mountain climbing and all that stuff. And most of them have never, you know, had never been to school because they couldn't stand a classroom. So these were just wild animals at the end of the day, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I think most law enforcement officers will tell you there's no more problematic a criminal than a teenager because they've got the body of a man and the brain of a child. And those two elements put together makes them extremely dangerous.
Dangerous animal.
Absolutely. So tell me, this experience working with young men like this really shaped your life. Let's talk about some of these life lessons that you learned while earning the respects of this hardcore group.
Well, I think one of the lessons I'd learned, and when I was young, I was always fearful, right? I was afraid of everything. So one thing I learned from these boys is that, and I'd learned it before then, because if I walked in there showing any fear, I'd be dead, right? I'd be gone in a minute. So one thing I learned, and it's really a life lesson still now, as I practice law, fear gets you nothing, and you can control it. It's not something that somebody's putting on you. You're putting it on yourself, and all it does is hurt you. Once you learn to control fear, just like dropping the guy in the middle of the ocean with the sharks, you may or may not believe me, but those sharks can smell fear. They know what fear is. Wild animals can smell fear. As soon as they smell fear, they know they have you. They know you're prey. If you do not show them fear, they then all of a sudden become fearful. And that's what happened with the boys. They knew I was not afraid of them. They knew I could take care of myself, and they liked that, right? And I liked what I saw in them because they were survivors. No parents, abused, neglected, thrown away out in the woods. It might as well have been a dump, a city dump. They took the kids to and just dumped them off and left them.
These kids were essentially feral children.
They definitely were. And they did fine in the woods. They would, in the first few months, they were always running away. We'd have to track them down. I had my trackers in the group would say, okay, he's run away, let's go find him. And most of the time they hadn't done anything wrong. Sometimes they had, they'd broken into somebody's camp, they'd they'd taken the little girl's dolls and put a knife up between its legs. I mean, these guys were just emotionally disturbed, which was the name that we put on them and what they were being treated for. They could not control their emotions. Absolutely could not.
Were you able to help them? I know you earned their respect, but once camp was done, did you ever follow up with them? Any of them?
Yes, I had some boys call me back. One of them introduced me to his wife, and another one told me he was now wrestling bears in Minnesota. So I did hear from them, and I did hear. We did at the end of the journey. There was one young black boy who was just a terror. Talk about a feral animal, and everybody else in the group hated him. They just picked on him all the time, and so I was his protector. We got to be buddies. And he knew that I would take care of him. So we had all gone on a long river trip, and there was a flash flood during that trip. We almost lost one of the boys, but we eventually found him, got him back. But that same boy, the year I left, he went on the same trip, and he was drowned. And one of the boys told me that two of the other boys that had always hated him when I was there to protect him had thrown him off the cliff into the river. And I could see that because they could not get at him while I was there. So that's really the thing I can't forgive myself for, is leaving him there unprotected.
It's hard. There's only so much a person can do, particularly when being outnumbered, particularly when dealing with such troubled young people. There seems to be a commonality among all of these troubled young people, and that is a lack of parental involvement. Tell me a little bit about your experiences with that, a little bit about their backstories.
Well, this young boy that was, and again, they did not tell us much of the backstories, except the really ones that you had to watch out for. And that particular one was on the path to being a serial killer. They always start mutilating animals. And that's what he had done. He's the one that cut the legs off of a dog and put it under his bed. He put a cigarette lighter up the nose of a horse. He first night at camp, he heated up a bow saw in the campfire, and he went over and put it on the back of one of the boys that was there. So, and he's also the one that broke into the camp with the knife situation and the doll. So, but there are a couple of things you had to do. I had to respect them. They had to respect me. You had to earn that respect. They had to earn my respect. They had to earn their respect. They knew I had their back. The one incident that turned them all around was when they got me in the middle of a gang fight. They had gone through we were up at the fairgrounds in Texas. The two of the boys had wandered off, because you don't go around holding hands with these boys. They just take off when they come back, right?
Right.
They know where their next meal is. So anyway, they were parked the bus in a railroad track, and all of a sudden, my two boys come running towards me with the rest of the group behind me, and then there's about 40 people, young men, lined up at the other end of the alley, keeping the bus from going out, right? And they started throwing rocks and bottles and all kinds of crap at us. And I was standing in the middle between my boys and them. And again, just because I'm such a wild man sometimes, and I just kind of, so one of the rocks almost hit me. So I picked up a rock, a bottle, I threw it right at the middle of these guys. I didn't know where my guys were. I just headed straight for the middle of these guys. And it took them 5 seconds to disperse. You couldn't find any of them. They were just, so once again, divine intervention.
Exactly.
And I've played that card so many times that, I can count on it.
Somebody up there's looking out for you, no doubt.
Somebody's looking out for me, yeah.
You kind of
anyway, that cemented them, right? They had a celebration after that. They thought this was great. We're back in Chicago. We're having gang fights. This guy's like us.
Right.
So yeah, that's what you had to do to show them who you were. Once they saw who you were, they respected you, and we really got to love each other. We were a family, wild men. Anybody saw us coming, they headed the other way. It was just, and we were in this old, talk about the hippies. But all the guys had long hair. I had long hair at the point because you couldn't get a haircut anyplace. And driving this old battered school bus all over the country.
Amazing. Tell us a little bit about what the camping experience was like. I thought that was an interesting element of your story.
Well, again, the school the boys' home in Texas couldn't handle them. So they bought 20 acres out in East Texas. Far East Texas, very racist, very, white, blacks only, and that kind of thing. So we ran into a lot of trouble just because we were kind of a half black, half white group. And where the blacks couldn't go, we wouldn't go, right? That was just our rule. And so they bought this campsite, and they literally gave us the buses. We got off the bus. It was out in the middle of nowhere. There was no water. There was no power. They gave us some tools to build our own campsite. We had to haul the water in big canvas bags. And probably for the first month, most of the boys wouldn't even get out. They hated it out there. There was no girls. There was no fun. There were no movies. There was, regular stuff teenagers like.
Right.
So again, that's when they started running away. So we built a campsite. We built the bunkhouse. It was probably 600 square feet and had bunk beds in it and the whole bit. And that was their home. It was our home. And we did that together. So another thing that brought us together.
It seems like this recreation of family was important to them and you. I think you became kind of a father figure to them. And I think they became kind of siblings to each other as time went on.
Right. I was more like a big brother. I was only like 4 or 5 years older than some of them. So,
right.
It was a big brother, and they liked having a big brother who cared about them, who loved them. But yeah, it was a family. None of them had had a family. They didn't know what that was like. What does it feel like to have a family? Everybody cares for each other. So that was the biggest part of it, I think, at the end.
Absolutely. That's the lure of a gang, is that they want some kind of family structure, right?
That's right. That's right. So they have some structure to live within. They know what the rules are.
Exactly.
And of course, we made our own rules, which was nice, right? I mean, at the camp, you couldn't touch the boys. You couldn't, it wasn't quite that bad. But out there, they knew what the repercussions were. They weren't going to get hurt, but they were going to get subdued for a period of time.
Tell me a little bit about your own family life, what it was like collaborating with your son, Patrick, on this book.
Oh, that was great. I wrote the first version of the book longhand just because I thought at one point everybody told me it was such a good story I should write it down. And then when I finally submitted it to a publisher in Boston, they said, we really love this story. It's such a great story, but you're just not much of a writer. And
You're like, thank you very much.
and that's what I needed, some divine intervention. Didn't happen. So
Right.
yeah. So what are you going to do with that? Anyway, when Pat went to school, he got a degree in creative writing. I said, look, I have this old manuscript, and you know how dads and sons, okay, Dad, sure.
Yeah, exactly.
So no, he took it on him, and he put it together. It was readable. It was, he put it in a format that was intelligible. And he was a good writer, and I wasn't.
Wonderful. And it must have been a bonding experience for you two as well, working together.
It was great.
Because sometimes it's hard to get your son to listen to those old stories back in 1971, might as well be 1981, or, 1881, right?
Yeah, or 1600.
Exactly. Tell me a little bit about your law practice and how some of these life lessons you learned while living in East Texas have come to help you over the years.
Well, I was originally, I got to be a social worker, and I worked with the Red Cross internationally, going from the Arctic Circle down to, the South Seas on disasters. So after that, what my specialty came to be was crisis intervention. So it's still what I do in my law work, because I do family law mostly. And, I'll never forget the first threat I had from the other side. I got a call at 2:00 in the morning on the phone, and the guy said, and I had just started, right? And the guy said, you don't know who this is, but I know who you are, and I'm going to kill you and everybody in your family. And then he hung up. And this was back where you couldn't trace anything.
Right.
So it's hard to know. I had an idea. I knew somebody in the police department helped me track this guy down. So, and I tell people this story and they say, really? But anyway, so I found his number. I called him at 2:00 in the morning. About 3 or 4 days later, I said, you don't know who this is, but I know who you are, and I'm going to kill you and everybody in your family. I never heard from him again. That's what I found out being with these boys. When you have a bully like that, you put it right back in his face, and he's going to back down every time. So I have had numerous threats, to my practice over the years, people coming in to shoot my staff, and it's just, just a nasty business.
There's probably nothing more emotionally charged than dealing with family law. I mean, I think most homicides, or a great percentage of homicides, are domestic in nature.
Yeah, I mean, people lose it. They lose control of their emotions, and they either want to get even, or they're just unbalanced, and they don't want to let go. And if they don't want to let go, they'll kill somebody, or they'll kill themselves. Or I don't know how many, I've had at least half a dozen people over the years, clients, or have either been killed or killed themselves during the process.
It's frightening.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit more about your work with the Red Cross. Surely you're an adventurer here, because, you start out your young life hitchhiking across Texas, you work with wayward teens, then you become a social worker, and you're working with the Red Cross, and you're going to unbelievable destinations. Tell me a little bit about that chapter of your life.
Yeah, so I got hired. They needed a social worker. In those days, there were 4 regional offices of the Red Cross that did disaster work. And they used to do a lot more of it then than they do now. So I was hired as a social worker to run the family service function of a disaster. So if there's for instance, when I was in St. Louis, we went up to Appalachia, and there had been a flood up there. And so what we did was we went in there and got them clothes and food and places to live, and sometimes housing. And I would organize the social work part of that, which means the caseworkers, I'd recruit those, and they'd be out talking to the individuals. So that's what I did. Then I moved to San Francisco, and that territory was from Alaska to Guam. So I went to a typhoon in Guam and spent about 3 or 4 months there. I went to a flood up in the Arctic Circle that affected the Eskimo villages, and they flew us in. The bush pilots would fly us into the village, and we would help them buying skidoos or guns or whatever else they had lost in the flood. And they eventually sent me to the International Red Cross because I had drafted a disaster training course for the American Red Cross. The International Red Cross found out about that. They asked me if I would go to Central America, to Honduras, and help them write up a disaster course and then train the people in the Central American countries, and because they had just had a huge flood. So I was down there for 4 or 5 months, writing the course and then traveling through Central America, training the people. And again, divine intervention. While I was there, the Honduran government was overthrown by one of the generals, and thank goodness one of the generals that overthrew it was kindly towards the Red Cross.
Again, somebody's watching out for you there, without
Yeah.
a doubt. You've had a lot of adventures. The one that you write about is taking place in 1971. If you were to go back a half a century, back to that summer, start it over again, one, would you do it again? Two, what would you do differently? Or would you leave everything pretty much the way it was?
I'd leave it just the way it was.
Yeah.
Except for the one boy that I, will never forgive myself for, but that's life, right? Certain things we can't control. We have to understand what those things are.
Exactly. Aside from the young man you lost there, or I shouldn't say you lost, who was lost during the experience.
No, I lost him.
Yeah. What are there any other young men that stick out to you that you still remember, strongly?
Yeah, I think I remember all of them strongly. They all had their particular traits, and it was just sad to see these 15, 16, 17-year-old boys who didn't know how to tell time. They didn't know how to read. I remember one day one of them asking me, he says, "Bill, you went to college, didn't you?" I said, "Yeah, I went to college." He says, "Do you think we could go to college?" I said, "Absolutely, you could go to college." So, they needed hope. They needed somebody to tell them, yes, you can do something better than what you're doing now. You have just as much potential as anybody else does. You just have to use it. And so really, I remember all of them. And it's really the best job I ever had.
I'm sure part of the tragedy is a lot of these streetwise kids who don't know how to tell time or read do have average or above average intelligence. They've just never been disciplined, and they've never been given any parental guidance, and they've never been able to stick with school.
There's never been any hope. We all need hope as we're growing up, right? Well, I want to do this, and I know I can do it because my brother did it, or somebody else did it, or they're telling me I can do it. Nobody told them that.
Right.
All they told them was that you're trash and you need to be out here when nobody else can see you. And we don't care what happens to you when you're out there.
Absolutely.
So that's a hard message to get over for a young man, right? Very difficult. And I think we made a lot of progress. One of the things I remember the most was they used to give me maybe a week every 3 months or something as a vacation. And the first time I came back, they were all waiting for me, like 3 miles from camp for the turn-in road. Just they knew I was coming back that day, and they were waiting for me to come. And that, that was our family. That was our tribe.
It's a wonderful story. The name of the book is called Wolf Creek. It is written by William Pardue and his son, Patrick J. Pardue. It's available on Amazon. You can download it on Kindle. You can order a paperback copy of it and have it in your hand and read it and cherish it. I think it'll tell you a lot about the state of racial relations, about young people, about wayward teens in 1971, but it will also help you reflect upon your own life and the major chapters that have transpired, and will be a wonderful journey for you to remember your journey from being a young adult to being a man. And it's a terrific story. William Pardue, Bill, thank you so much for joining us here today on Spotlight.
Thank you, sir, for having me. I appreciate it.
Our pleasure. And to the viewers at home, I'm Logan Crawford, thanking you for your time this time. Until next time on Spotlight.
Thank you.